follows an extract from my book Fête Fatale, available from Amazon. Chapter 7, Part 1. Jonty had finally surfaced from his old bedroom, and the various members of the band had cleared themselves and their bedding away, delittering ad hoc sofa beds and chairs, and were now awaiting a train back to Manchester. On hearing that his uncle was visiting for the day, Jonty had rearranged his plans so as to join in the family dinner. He was just leaving the house to round up and evict any hangers-on that had commandeered his sister's lounge for the night, as he met his uncle in the doorway. A hearty handshake and the mandatory banter surrounding Benedict's involvement in the police band ensued. Sergeant Maddox deposited his cargo onto the kitchen table, and Inspector James asked about the prospect of lunch. "I'm making some cheese on toast for me and Drew. Will that do?" said Beth. Recognising their hungry nods as agreement, she turned the grill on and set to preparing lunch. Beth began slicing the white, crumbly Cheshire cheese, which was the only acceptable form of cheese to adorn toast in that area. Sliced tomatoes and brown sauce provided the perfect accompaniment to the mild flavour and the saltiness of the cheese from that district. Once one side of the wholemeal bread was toasted, she loaded the slices with the cheese and set it under the grill. It quickly bubbled to satisfaction, and after topping the slices with the sauce and tomatoes, she set it before the policeman with hot drinks before ringing the bell to summons Drew to come and eat his lunch. The silver service bell was something of a standing joke in the village. Beth had introduced the institution when the children were small, saying that she was weary of yelling across the house or down the garden to alert the family that a meal was ready. The fact that the neighbours often also knew that a meal was ready to be served was of secondary importance. These days she rang the bell out of habit, and her only concession to the limited radius of appeal meant that she sounded the toll with less gusto and less repeatedly than in previous years. It evidently still performed its duty as Drew ambled into the kitchen like Pavlov's dog expecting to be fed. Between mouthfuls of creamy cheese on toast, they all chatted about the recent turn of events. It wasn't necessary to procure promises of silence or mention the concept of breach of confidentiality. It was already understood. Having a detective chief inspector in the family made this a matter of course, and Benedict would never have divulged anything of an overly sensitive nature. He was quite happy to set up a temporary centre of operations in his sister's kitchen. The tongue and groove panelled walls had been privy to many mysteries in the past, and many a misdemeanour had been solved over the large pine breakfast table. The hospitality and canteen arrangements were far more conducive to thought than a Stark office. After explaining that matters might not be as straightforward as they first hoped, the two policemen began to talk amongst themselves, referring at intervals to invoices and letters. Drew returned to his art studio, and Beth continued with the washing up and preparing for the evening meal, in between topping up the mugs of the engrossed policemen. "You say that you know who this C. Jefferson is, then?" said Maddox. The inflection in his voice lifted at the end of the sentence, turning his statement into a question. "I know who it could be, and I doubt there could be two of such a name cropping up in an enquiry like this one. The only Jefferson that I know of around here is Conrad Jefferson, a potentially respectable businessman and also an executive fraudster. He did a stint inside not too long ago and came out early on the grounds of it being his first offence and on good behaviour. It may well have been his first conviction, but we're all quite sure that his list of offences would be as long as your arm if he wasn't clever enough to not get caught before. The only surprise is that he got caught this time." I knew I'd heard the name. It was quite the topic of conversation when I came to HQ last year on a training course. I'd heard that he'd finally been sentenced, but I've no idea who he is or what he looks like. "He's a personable chap, quite likeable really. Just too clever for his own good," said James. He picked up his iPad and, after passing through a variety of security screens, pulled up a photograph of Jefferson. Without thinking, Beth looked over her brother's shoulder to look at the image and said, "I saw him yesterday. He was at the fête. He came to our stall with a lady. I presumed it was his wife. He looked thoroughly bored, though he didn't complain. I think he was trying to be interested and offered to buy her anything she wanted. They bought quite a lot off us in the end." "Now that is interesting," said James. "It's a bit too much of a coincidence for my liking, though I can't imagine what it is that I'm inferring. Even so, I think that we shall have to pay him a visit. He lives in Harrisfield. His story is that after succumbing to the temptation to embezzle away company funds, just the once, mind you, he says that he's learned his lesson and is staying on the straight and narrow for sure now. What can he be doing turning up in this chain of events? I think that he can wait his turn for now, though. I'd better get along to Bruff's to meet the forensic boys and girls. Do you want to come along, Maddox?" "I don't think that I'm overly keen to see anyone shove hypodermics into a body that's been dead a day already, thank you. I'll report back to the station and then head off home, if you don't mind, of course." "Fair enough, though you'll have to overcome such squeamishness sooner or later. Leave this paperwork with me for the time being. I'll look after it, don't you worry. I'll be getting back to the office in the morning to see how they want to play things, and I'll give you a call sometime tomorrow to tell you how the land lies." As Maddox closed the back door, James sat back down at the kitchen table. "I'll have another coffee before I make my way to Bruff's, if you don't mind. I've got a bit of time if Maddox isn't too keen to be initiated in the wonders of forensic retrieval. There's no point me hanging around and watching them. I want to have another look over some of these papers so I've got a good grasp on things before I speak to the super tomorrow. The toxicology report will be a month or so before we get any results back, and we'll have to do the best we can until then. There's no point in guessing what he might have done, and I need to establish some facts." He reached out and opened up the laptop and then sighed with exasperation at his futile attempts to get past the password screen. "I'll have to hand this over to the lads at HQ. Once they get their hands on it, they'll get into it in no time at all. But no doubt I'll have to join a very long queue to get it to them. I'll be waiting for weeks to probably discover that there was nothing worth bothering about in the first place. I'd like to have a good look at Mr. Barlow's dealings now that I know his name is tenuously linked with Jefferson. There's nothing for it but to sit and wait my turn. It's so annoying doing nothing just because you're in a queue. I hate having to sit around." Beth looked thoughtfully at her brother and made the staged gesture of a polite cough. "If you don't mind bending a few rules, I might just be able to help you out there," she said. "How on earth can you do that? I know your computer skills. You can just about manage Facebook and email. What do you propose to do?" "Well, when I say I may be able to help you, what I mean is that I know that I can definitely direct you to somebody who can. Do you remember Kirsty Pepper from the WI? Her husband, Carlton, is a computer code whiz, and strictly under the radar, he's quite something of a hacker. For purely altruistic purposes, of course. He hasn't got a criminal bone in his body, which is quite a loss to the underworld, I'm sure. If he decided to turn delinquent, he'd be unbeatable." "I can't believe you're telling me this, Beth. Just how wide does your dubious network spread?" "Well, do you want to peep inside that computer or don't you?" Beth's brother sat considering the proposal for some minutes before he replied. "I think that it's high time I walked over to Bruff's. While I'm out, if that laptop becomes mysteriously unlocked, I won't wonder too much about it. If we find nothing of interest, then we can magically lock it away again and let it rot in a queue without further worry. If we find anything that proves useful, then I can quietly pursue my lines of inquiry, and when I need to reference the information, I can date it back to our official access into John's computer system. That should cover it." For the full book of Fête Fatale, available in paperback or as an ebook, follow the link in the cards in the description box or find details on my website at sharonbill.com. Thanks for listening.